Welcome to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast, where the goal is to improve organizations and serve students one leader at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Yoakum. If you're a department chair in higher education or any type of educational leader, and you want to improve yourself to better serve and influence those you lead, you've come to the right place. Because the best way to improve an organization is to improve its leader. Let's get started. Welcome back, friends, and thank you for taking some time to invest in yourself and those you serve by focusing on your leadership development. Hey, before we get into today's episode, just wanted to remind you that if you and your team are looking for a great professional development opportunity all in one place, please consider attending the Academic Chairpersons Conference February 7th through the 9th, 2024 in Indianapolis. I can't think of a single event that has contributed more to my development as a chair than this conference. Also, as a member of the advisory board, trust me, we have a great lineup of presentations, workshops, and invited speakers. So there's still time to register. Check out the show notes for the link. On today's episode, I'm so excited to have Dr. Jamie Hooyman, Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Northwest Missouri State University. A little bit about Dr. Hooyman is that she joined Northwest in July of 2016 as Vice Provost and was appointed the university's first female provost in November of 2017. She earned a bachelor's degree in education with a concentration in physical education at Missouri State University, a master's degree in education with a concentration in exercise physiology and fitness from Northern Illinois University, and a doctorate of education in human performance with a concentration in exercise science from Oklahoma State University. Prior to coming to Northwest, Dr. Hooyman spent 10 years at North Central Missouri College in various roles, including Vice President of Instructional Effectiveness. She was also a faculty member at Central Oklahoma in the Department of Kinesiology and Health Studies, and prior to working in higher education, she instructed and managed exercise and cardiac programs at recreation and healthcare facilities. So now at Northwest Missouri State, as the Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Hooyman leads the development and assessment of academic programs while overseeing learning operations, academic quality, and student success. So you do not want to miss this. Get your notepad ready or however you take notes. Going to learn a lot of great things about leadership from Dr. Hooyman. So today we are joined by Dr. Jamie Hooyman, Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Northwest Missouri State. Dr. Hooyman, thank you so much for joining us on the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. How are things at Northwest Missouri State?
We are doing great at Northwest. It's hard to believe that the semester is coming to a close. We're in our final week of classes, gearing up for December graduation.
All right. Well, same here. And for those of you listening, if you might not be aware, but the university that I am at, we are in the same athletic conference as Northwest Missouri State, oftentimes rivals in sports, but also very familiar with the programs and the great work they're doing there. So again, Jamie, I'm so honored and thrilled to have you on because, even though our focus is to support chairs or other mid-level academic leaders, leadership is leadership. And I know personally, I have learned from all levels of leaders inside of higher ed, outside, from industry, and my background, certainly those that are leaders in public schools. And so if you would, just to get us started, please share with our listeners a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your leadership journey. How did you end up serving in your current position as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Northwest Missouri State?
Well, I actually probably had a little bit different journey than some in higher ed because I grew up with educators in my house. And that was always a deal. My father always wanted me to be an educator. And of course, at 18, you do everything not to do exactly what your parents say. But I did get my first degrees in education and pre-med and went on and got my master's degree in exercise physiology. And my first career job was actually working in hospitals in cardiac rehab and fitness. And kind of found my way back to higher ed through a different path. But through the years, like you said, leadership is leadership. I had a leadership role in many of my first jobs through the fitness side. And then when I came over to education, which by the way, I'm sure my dad is smiling because I loved it. I loved teaching the students. I loved being in the classroom. But as you know, in higher education, sometimes opportunities show up. And if you're willing and able
Hmm.
to take those opportunities, they turn into different pathways. And so that's exactly what happened through my career in higher education is opportunities came up. I got real involved with assessment and accreditation processes, and that
Yes.
led to different pathways and eventually ended up here at Northwest. I followed a different route too, is that I went from a 4-year institution to a 2-year institution back to a 4-year. And and so that gave me
Okay.
probably a little different perspective because I did the typical started the typical path at the 4-year, and then we had the opportunity or the need to move home to Trenton, Missouri. And
Hmm.
I spent 10 years as in various roles, but ended up being the vice president of the North Central Missouri Community College. And the 2 year is very different from the 4 year in regards to a lot of different things. One, they're usually smaller, so you take on many roles, you wear many hats. And two, the vocational side of it, the technical side of it. 4 years doesn't have a lot of involvement into the technical side. And so learning those different routes. And then I came to Northwest Missouri State University, had the opportunity to come over as a vice provost. But within 6 months, our provost left, and I stepped up in the interim role, and then became the first female provost that the Northwest has ever had.
I did not realize that. That is a wonderful accomplishment. Jamie, you had a lot of great stuff there in that introduction because obviously being willing to serve in various capacities, you hit on it with assessment and accreditation. It might not be somebody's first priority, but I tell you what, it is so important in higher ed, whether it's from an higher learning commission standpoint, a programmatic standpoint. I know in my world of teacher education, that's what keeps the doors open and the paper that the degree is or the certificate is printed on valid. So really glad that you mentioned your journey there. Really unique that you've had that perspective from both starting the 4 year, the 2 year, and then back at the 4 year at Northwest Missouri State. So how do you define leadership, and to what extent has that maybe changed and or stayed the same throughout your career?
I've been extremely fortunate on my journey that I had some amazing mentors that have entered my life. And I truly believe a success of a person is not only based on their hard work, but also that you help people along the way and you help uplift those around you. And that's what I had. I had mentors that was willing to take someone with very little knowledge or experience and basically give some faith to them and give them some opportunities to do that. And I think that helped. That and my father, like I said, he was actually a dean of a college, so I grew up in education. I think those kind of things led me to a leadership of servitude, that a true leader is someone that does have to work hard and does have to have good knowledge and you want experience and stuff, but it's also a person who's willing to put others and in this case the university first, and that you're willing to stay abreast in your field and current of what's going on while at the same time challenging yourself to help the university continue moving forward. As you know, higher education is under a lot of fire, and we go back to that assessment and those attributes. We are continually under the fire to prove ourselves, our worth, our value. And I am a true believer that higher education has enormous amount of value and worth. But I think it's important for us not to take that for granted and to be able to articulate that and show and tell other people why. Because things are changed. You've been in education quite a while. I've been in education way long time, and it's not the same. People's perspectives aren't the same. Their desired outcomes have changed to a certain degree. And I think it's real important for the future leaders to continually strive to stay on top of what's coming.
Jamie, I'm glad you mentioned that. And one of the many reasons I think it's really, really valuable to have someone in your position on this podcast is I do think the role of any higher ed leader is changing. I think the role of advocacy, I always say, as whatever you're the leader of, if you're not, you're the head cheerleader, no matter how loud or no matter how loud you cheer or not, nobody's going to cheer louder than you. So if you're not cheering, then that's the level of advocacy. And I do think that you're right. I'm in a field of teacher preparation that on one hand has been under fire as well, but on the other hand, there's a lot of great people doing great things. And in my current role, I think it's my job to also advocate for my current profession and department. So really appreciate that. And it's also on a side note, you said your dad was a dean, and so that at growing up, did you ever say to yourself, I'll do anything but be a college administrator?
Multiple times. Like I said, our deal was when I went away to college is that he really wanted me to get an education degree and I really did not. So we compromised and I dual majored. But it's funny how sometimes those parents are right in the long run because I really found I have been fortunate. I've loved every job I've done and they've all been in fields where I can give something. But when I first stepped in that classroom, it's like something clicked and I knew this was where I belonged. And to see students' dreams come true, I can't imagine a field that's more rewarding.
Oh, so powerful what you said. I agree. Any level of education, those listening, if you know, you know. There's just that connection, that I guess shared energy you get in a classroom that is really hard to replicate anywhere else. So I am curious, as the current provost and VP of Academic Affairs there at Northwest Missouri State, from your position, your perspective, what do you look for in your department chairs on your campus?
I think when I'm looking for someone to take on a potential leadership role, I look for a couple different things. Obviously, you want them to have the knowledge and skill set they need to be able to oversee their specific area. But typically, you're going to find that. I think the things I look for maybe outside of the realm of the knowledge and skills, I look for a certain attitude, an attitude of moving forward, an attitude of taking on challenges. I look for a positive atmosphere that they can create because I think people work better if they're able to feel empowered and safe in their atmosphere. And I think a good leader has to help be very specific on how to create that atmosphere. I also look at for people who aren't afraid of challenges and that they're willing to fail. And that sounds probably weird when you're talking about someone with leadership skills, but we all fail at something. And it's how we fail, I think, that makes a big difference. If you let the failure overtake you and you shut down, that's one way. But if you let the failure build your character and you build from that and keep moving forward, I think that's what higher education, that's something that's very powerful for someone in leadership in higher education because failure is going to come. But we need those kind of people who will continue to strive forward and try different things and try new things to basically our goal, all of our goals are to help their students reach their successful goals. And so I kind of look for some of those. I look more for characteristics and traits a lot of times.
I really appreciate you sharing that because so many powerful things there in what you just said. Yeah, I think anytime any of us in our lives, going back to the first job we ever had, I think we'd all agree that having a leader, a supervisor, a boss that makes it okay to fail within reason, that, yeah, within reason, yeah.
Within reason.
Some jobs, if you fail, maybe people get hurt, but within reason. I think we would all want that. And I'm glad you touched on that because I think more and more across different industries, but certainly in higher education, we talk so much as we should and emphasize making sure our students are what I always call valued, seen, and heard, and they feel safe and they can take chances. And at the same time, maybe we forget to extend that same philosophy or grace to the other people on campus. And so I think that's very important. Like I said, I think very few people listening would prefer to have a leader or a boss that says either perfection every time or, there's consequences. So I'm really glad that you touched on that in terms of what you look for in chairs. So what was your first, go ahead, continue. Yeah.
I can I add one more thing? But I think also the one thing you want to look for is their, and that plays into all this, is their ability to make decisions. Because as you move up in leadership, it is crucial that you have the ability to deal with conflict and make a decision and move that decision forward and get other people on board with that decision. So those are a couple other things I think are real important when we're looking at the future.
Because you mentioned that, let's just dive into that because, I always say that leadership is a people business. People are messy. None of us are perfect. I always tell leaders, you'll never have a perfect group of people and they'll never have a perfect leader. That means you. But part of that, I think one of the reasons that some people might shy away from what I would call formalized or titled leadership roles on our campus, because I think anyone that serves students or the mission of the school is a leader. But a lot of that is that conflict, making those tough decisions. How do you approach conflict, whether it's a difficult conversation, decision that might generate some conflict? Maybe just share how you go about that, and maybe some things you've learned.
And that's kind of goes back to one of the traits I look for is that person with the ability to learn from their mistakes and move forward. I would say the first time I had to deal with conflict was an absolute failure because I don't think anyone wants to or likes to tell other people that things aren't going well or they're not doing something correctly or right. And so I think one of the important things I learned after my first experience is I need to be true to who I am. And I tend to be someone that's very forthcoming and honest and straight. There's always things as you're in your leadership role, there are always things you cannot disclose. But I think people appreciate when you tell them exactly what you can tell them and help them come to the realization of this may be been a better way, or how about trying this? But I think if you're honest and upfront with people and address it quickly, I think the longer you let confrontation go, the more it's going to cause you problems. And it is frustrating as a leader because one of the things when you're dealing with confrontations is a lot of times you can't disclose everything. They maybe have a belief of X happened when it really, they're only hearing one side. That's something you're going to have to deal with and be able to accept. They always say get thick skin, but I think it's more of an attitude. It's more of a sense of positivity that, yes, they're thinking this, but let's help them see how there could be other opportunities or changes or something that might have occurred. Confrontation, I think, is best if you deal face to face. I'm a big believer if there is something big enough to have a confrontation to call someone in and or ask them, stop by and ask them to go for a walk with you, something where you're dealing with it face to face. I don't think confrontation is dealt with well through email or things like that. And that takes some experience.
I agree. I think that's one of the things, no matter how long you've been in a leadership role, there are some things I say, it might not get easier, but we do get better at it, right? And so it's not a natural. I would worry about somebody that walks around every day hoping to find conflict in difficult conversations. But and I've shared this on previous podcasts, is we are serving not just the person with whom we have the conflict, but we're also serving everyone else in the organization by addressing that. You said earlier, you were talking about when you look for chairs and good leaders, those that can create a specific atmosphere, what we might call culture. So maybe talk a little bit about, with your experience and your thoughts, what can leaders, maybe new chairs, the life of a tenure track professor is a lot different than maybe your first formal leadership role. One might be a scholar of certain culture, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily understand from day one how to create that culture that you all live in. So just maybe an opportunity, what are some of your thoughts or pieces of advice for maybe that new chair or middle level leader in higher ed trying to create the culture that they would like to have?
Actually, I think one of the biggest challenges is becoming a chair because you're taking that role. You have one foot in the faculty realm and one foot in the administrative realm. And even though in my mind, they're very seamless, I know that first step into that is not. And like you said, especially in higher ed, but in a lot of different areas of leadership, you tend to promote the people that have been very successful in their field and doing very well. But that doesn't always mean that they have been trained in a lot of things that are administrative. The people part of administrative to me is probably the most challenging, and I'm sure everybody feels that way too, is your expectations before you get to that role of your colleagues and how things work, and then your expectations once you take that step into the administration is very different. So I think as a director or a chair, I do think that's a very difficult role because you're still trying to cross the bridge, but then you have to go from a more narrow perspective to a broader perspective of what's the best for the university, at least your department and in totality versus one little area. I think some of the skill sets that we need to do a better job of helping people in that area is the personnel side. I think that's a huge challenge for directors and chairs because they may be experts in their field, but they may not have ever had to do it in the scope of disciplining other people or trying to move an agenda forward. So the personnel side. The budget side, I think, is important, but I think a lot of people, if you do a little bit of training, you can get that. But the decision making of moving from a singular scope to a broad scope, I think, is another area that we could really help leaders if we help them more get to that because they're probably coming up through discipline. They're probably going to be critical thinkers and they're going to be problem solvers and they're going to have a lot of those great skill sets you need, but they may have not had the experience of seeing it from a broader perspective and how that impacts across the university. So I think those are two areas that we could really do better training directors and chairs in.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more in my own experience and then research, in researching and writing about being a chair. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles or thresholds that we cross is we get really good and we have to I always say, if you have the forest and the trees, to be a successful professor, you're an expert on one tree. And we get hired to focus on that tree every day. And then all of a sudden we become a dean or a director or a chair. And now we have to look at all the trees and we either still want to focus on our tree. It's just so different. And that's in many ways been what has motivated me from the beginning to maybe in some small way help train chairs and directors is because the life of a chair, director, dean, provost, beyond is in my experience much different than the life of a successful tenure track faculty member. So Jamie, if you could go back to whenever you took your first what I would call official or titled leadership job in higher ed, what advice would you give yourself now if you could go back as that first whatever the title was? Gosh, what might you tell yourself?
They always say, it sounds very cliche, go in listening, less talking, more listening. And it may be cliche, but it's very true. A lot of times you're so excited for that first role and you have all these wonderful ideals. You want to implement them and push them forward. But I think the best thing you can do is go in and especially if you're coming, it's one thing to take an advancement within your institution. But if you've gone to a different institution, I think it serves you well in both cases to get the scope of the land, to listen to the people, to understand their concerns, to understand where things have gone well, to understand where things have not gone so well, and then start implementing change as it's needed. I'm not one to make change just for change to happen. I think change, there has to be an intent and a purpose, and you have to be able to define that and articulate that. Because to get people to help follow you and get things accomplished, they have to understand it. And if you can't articulate, we know the W's, then you're probably going to have trouble with that. So I think it's real important to listen. I think it's important to be able to communicate and articulate well what your end result and goal and outcome needs to be or wants to be, because you've got to have people buy in to be able to accomplish things. And I think the other thing is probably learning the art of compromise. When is it not okay to lose, and when is it okay to give a little bit and find that compromise that works for maybe not exactly what you wanted, but what's best for the unit.
Great stuff to any leader, but certainly would have helped. That advice would have helped me when I was new to the leadership role. I think that it's so important to realize that with the best of intentions, I think a lot of us think we're going to, come in, have all these great ideas and changes. And I think a lot of us need to realize, at least in my experience, that most of the people that we will lead, so to speak, have been here long before we started the leadership job and might be here long after we leave the leadership job. And so they're the real foundation of the organization. We're just kind of here to maybe point it in a different direction or be stewards of that organization. But the final here is what I like to call some closeout or some quick questions. And these are just some things as we close out to ask you some things about what you're doing both professionally and personally. And so, first question here, I have three quick final round questions. What are you currently doing, planning to do, or hope to do to improve yourself as a leader?
It's interesting you should ask that because we experienced COVID, and all of our focus for those 2.5, almost 3 years was how to survive. And even after COVID ended and we were kind of, whatever norm is, getting back into our routines, there was still so much focus on just surviving the day to day and finding that norm that really up until this last year or so, I've neglected. I've saved all my money to make sure the faculty and everything gets what they need. That I've neglected my professional growth. And I do think that's a mistake. I don't care. I've been in this for over 30 years. I don't care if you've been in it 5 years or 30 years. You've got to continue yourself to grow. And I think, I think being around other colleagues, conferences are nice. I know money's tight in higher ed. That's not always easy to do, but doing things that put you a little out of your comfort zone and exposing you to colleagues and other individuals in higher education so you can learn from them, I think is extremely important because one, I think it's easy as a leader to get to the point where you feel like you're doing everything like you should, but that's because you've gotten a rut and you're looking at it from one perspective. And I think it's imperative that we challenge ourselves to get out and talk to other people, to associate with other directors or chairs or provost or whoever that may be, to challenge ourselves to see if we're really doing what we think we're going to. So I think it is important, regardless how long you've been in this, to continue to grow professionally, either through conferences, read. I'm an avid reader. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, just because you read all this stuff and you get so many great ideas and you're like, oh, so excited. Uh, but I think that's extremely important. And the other thing I've been doing a lot lately that I think has been great for my personal growth is I've been doing a lot more mentoring and working with other provosts, new to the provost role. You said it earlier, directors and chairs and provosts don't tend to have long lives in their roles. They're tough roles. So I've been spending more of my time trying to help younger provosts come into the role and help set expectations and growth and things like that. And it's amazing how much by helping someone else, even someone new to it, broadens your knowledge and your ability. It makes you think differently. And that's so good for me, at least, to see it from a different perspective and think differently and challenge myself to be surrounded by people who are so much better than I am and that will help me move forward.
So many good things there, Jamie, that you touched on. But I always say, if you're not mentoring, you're not fully leading, and just the awareness. It takes a really strong, courageous leader to admit that there are people that might know more than them, that they might not always be the smartest person in the room. And I always say, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room because then I still look good, but I don't have to work as hard. I'm really glad and thank you for mentoring because we do need great mentors because sometimes leadership roles in higher education kind of get a bad rap because we just maybe view them from one lens. And I think having the right mentors, getting people into it for the right reasons, not only does that help our leaders grow, but to me that's the highest compliment you can give somebody in leaving a legacy, which I define as, the extent to which you impact people you may never meet. And I think when we train leaders, every person they end up impacting is we help plant that seed. Second question: if you were forced to take a free day and do whatever you wanted, and it couldn't in any way involve work, what would you do?
I'm pretty family oriented, so I would probably spend time with my family. I have three amazing daughters that are all over the country, so I don't get to see them nearly as much as I'd like. I would take that opportunity to connect somehow with them and spend some time. Family is extremely important to me.
As it should be, and just for any of our leaders listening, that's just a good reminder to keep the main thing. And at the end of the day, it's a job, and even though we don't punch a time clock, there is a time where we need to shut it down and do other things. So I'm very glad you mentioned family. And then finally, any bits of advice or words of wisdom for chairs, directors, or any other mid-level leaders in higher education who want to improve their organization by improving themselves as leaders, which is kind of one of the mottos of this podcast. So I guess just any final bits of advice or words of wisdom for some of those new or aspiring chairs and directors that might be listening.
I think some of the most important things are one we just mentioned, learning to find that balance in your life, because I think to be a good leader, you have to have an internal sense of happiness and joy. And you have to, whatever that is, it doesn't mean you have to spend all your time X or Y, but whatever that is, balance, I think that's real important not to lose, because I think you lose your perspective if you get too buried down. I think it's important, very important, to be a selfless leader. Doesn't mean you don't ever do anything for yourself, but it does mean that you're always looking at the broader picture and doing the right thing. My saying is to people, if I can get up and look at myself in the mirror in the morning and know that I've made some tough decisions that people may or may not agree with, but I've done them with the best intent for the students and the faculty and staff, then it's okay. We will continue to move forward. If I ever get to the point where I can't do that, I'm probably in trouble. And then, like I said, I think one of the best things we can do, if I had to pick the most important job I do as a provost, I think it is training those younger leaders. I'm here for X amount of time, but if you can help grow that next generation of leaders, the impact is timeless. So those would be the three big things I guess I would say.
And those are wonderful, great advice. Well, hey, friends, we've come to the end of the podcast here. Just like to thank again Dr. Jamie Hooyman, Provost, Vice President of Academic Affairs at Northwest Missouri State, for joining us and giving us so many wonderful, just golden nuggets of advice for leaders. I would say you want to listen to this more than once and take notes about some of her great advice, because truly, she gets leadership and she's living that. And more importantly, she is passing it on to the next generation of leaders. So again, friends, thank you for joining us on the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. I wish you well, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. If you want to learn more about my leadership philosophy and how to be an effective chair, please consider my book, The Department Chair, A Practical Guide to Effective Leadership. You can find this and learn more about me by going to cjleadership.com. Also, please be sure to like this podcast, leave a review, and share with your colleagues. Thanks again for improving your organization and those you serve by improving yourself. Take care.